just going to do something, it's Goya Gaya Wanaji, and it's our fish talk, our fish pitch, and it's about working and walking together to help recover native fish. It's a really good message. So another introduction for Phil is that Phil is the chair of our Basin Community Committee. So the MWA has a Basin Community Committee. Phil is the chair. He's not an MWA employee, but he talks on behalf of the community and works with our staff and our authority board to make things better. But first, obviously, I want to acknowledge that we're here on Gomeroi and Kamilaroi land. Acknowledge the elders past, present and future. Obviously acknowledge any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in the room. Acknowledge my man Phil, proud Gomeroi man. And also acknowledge that I'm saddened by some of the stuff that's happened in the past, and I think it's really important that we acknowledge that and respect that, and I think we can and we will be better over time. So it's something that's really important to me, is just being better. Now, as Dr. Boyes talked to you about earlier, our native fish are in trouble in the basin. It's very important. We've got 46 odd species that live in the freshwater, another 15 or so that live in the estuary and use the Moree estuary. And native fish are really important, as you guys know, to our communities, to the ecology of the river. They're a food source. They're something that you guys do to relax and chase fish. But they're really struggling, and they've been struggling since us white fellas turned up and started buggering things up. Back in 2003, there was a thing called the Native Fish Strategy. The Native Fish Strategy talked about populations being less than 10% of what was here before white fellas turned up. And we sort of revisited that just a couple of years ago with an expert panel, and they sort of thought about it, and we've had some good wins. We've had some great wins with environmental water. Steve Starlow would stand up here and tell you how good the fishing's been in the past, and it's certainly true. But overall, our fish are struggling still, and are probably even a bit worse off than back in that 2003 era. So following the fish kills in Menindee, we introduced this native fish recovery strategy. And for now, it's funded with a very small bucket, and we want to chase more. But we've got these outcomes that we're chasing, and we've been investing in recovery actions in a couple of key locations, one being the Lower Darling, another being the mid-Moree sort of floodplains and wetlands where we focus on small fish. Some work in the Upper Condamine where we're looking at blackfish, which are particularly vulnerable to climate change, and also in the Upper Murrumbidgee in the ACT. But this strategy also identified a whole bunch of investment areas that we need to look at and need to invest in to make things better for fish and to help fish recovery. And everyone here that's spoken already today has talked about those things. There's fishway, there's cold water pollution, there's habitat programs and all that sort of stuff. And the good news is, without spooking the government, all governments, state and federal, are starting to invest in these complementary measures, these additional actions that we can do in addition to environmental water and better flows and better water management that can improve things for native fish. So this presents a really great opportunity for us to be better with our partnerships with First Nations people and rec fishers and the community. So while we were writing the Native Fish Recovery Strategy, we worked with a small group called the Cultural Advisory Group, which brought in the First Nations perspectives around native fish recovery and the importance of the cultural commitment that First Nations people have to protect native fish. And it's a really important and a really strong connection that they bring, and really important knowledge. And I would love to see that sort of bringing in the First Nations knowledge much more into all of these new local projects, these projects that are about building fishways and putting fish screens and habitat programs and so forth. So my message is certainly to really encourage that and embrace that. It's not easy, there are challenges, but it's something that we should do, and it's something that we should really work hard at, and we'll get better at it. And now I want to pass over to Phil, and Phil can sort of talk more about that connection to country and those partnerships.
Yo, Yamaninda, Phil Duncan Naya, Gomeroi Māori. That's hello and welcome. My name's Phil Duncan, and I'm a very proud Gomeroi man. Fantastic speakers before me. My connection to this river and the McIntyre and the Moree and Tycannah Creek goes back to the 1920s when my grandfather was first born. In fact, the tree that my grandfather was born under still stands. And I took Stuart and Annabelle out there along up to Mile Creek, back around Gum Flat and a couple of key places where I've camped and fished and paddled these rivers during my 59 years on this planet. I want to pay homage to my grandfather. The image on the left is my grandfather standing under the tree he was born under, along with his 6 sisters and his brothers. And that's me on the left, on your right-hand side, I should say, when I brought 25 PhD and Masters of Research students up to this country. And I pay respects to my 4 male totems. Firstly, the Yutundali, my nation, the Goanna, Gangil, the Corella, my grandfather, Bunda the kangaroo, my father, and Biggie Billa, which is me, the porcupine or echidna. Also, it's not just about what you see from a cultural perspective, and I think it's very, very important that we have a greater uptake of our cultural values and our knowledge. We've existed in this continent, the driest inhabited continent on this planet since time immemorial, and we've existed in a symbiotic relationship. We have been sustainable fisher people. You don't see fish mounted in our houses. So we've always managed native fish sustainably and catching only for the feed for the purpose of the day. And in fact, that we need to acknowledge that native fish populations are down to less than 10% since colonisation. And that's a sad story. And yes, there are a wide range of initiatives, but it's also about our Aboriginal constellations that guide us in how we interact, when we can fish. And if you look at a Murray cod recovery plan that I was involved in back in the early 90s, the only month you can take Gadu, which is Murray cod, is in the months with no R. May, June, July and August. Why? Because all the rest are migration and spawning periods. It's part of our law, LORE, and our customs and how we interact and keep these fish populations alive. The image on the left, why is that one? That's on my wife's country. So the image on the right's at Siding Springs, Warrumbungles, over at Coonabarabran, and the image on the left is on my wife's country, Yuin Walbunja country, on the south coast. Why? Because my mother is with me wherever I go. My dreaming, my culture never leaves me, never leaves us as Aboriginal people. And there is this unique opportunity we have now to look at two-way knowledge exchanges and bringing our cultural science, not our traditional ecological knowledge, our life and our way of life is a cultural science, and bringing Western science and methodologies and the cultural science together to make a difference. And all of us sitting at the table and sharing the story, sharing the load and sharing the journey. Because it's nothing about us without us nowadays. Our knowledge on fish migrations, and I'm going to share a couple with you. And I pay homage to mullion, the wedge-tailed eagle, strength, wisdom and spirit, as well as the saltwater fish and our native fish, and the footprints of us walking together and leaving a mark. I don't think any of you may have ever seen this image, but I want to share it with you. Because my grandfather told me some many years ago, and then my father reinforced it, that this northern part, the Marinara-Darling Downs of southwest Queensland, the northern part of New South Wales, northwest slopes and plains, are the lungs of the Murray-Darling Basin. What is that shape like? 8 rivers in the Gomeroi Nation, the Great Artesian Basin and the International Ramsar Site. That's recognised as one of the largest Macquarie perch or yellowbelly spawning holes in the northern part of the basin. And I got to sit on the Dungala, the Murray River, with Uncle Colin Walker. And he said, yeah, boy, he said, we're the kidneys. Why am I talking like that? Because that's our narrative. That's the way we tell our cultural science. It's a narrative. And there shouldn't be a greater uptake of it. And the message in that is, for a living, breathing entity to be sustained, we need all our vital organs working in unison together. So we need the salt, we need the lungs and the kidneys all pumping, all flowing. And the other issue is about greater fish passage. So the Murray-Darling Basin native fish recovery strategy is not just about this footprint here, it's about the whole of the footprint. And whilst we talk about connectivity and the coal water pollution and the many barriers to fish migration in the Mihai and the Guaida, the whole system needs to be reconnected. There was formerly 20,000 barriers to fish passage in the Murray-Darling Basin alone. Illegal and legal. I got to work with Penobscot Elder Butch Phillips, and when they decommissioned the dams over on the Penobscot River, he talked about the salmon refugees returning home. Cultural science. Uncle Colin Walker, when I sat, and Uncle Badger Bates, when I sat with them out on the Barker, I don't call it the Darling anymore, I call it the Barker. But on the Dungala, the Murray River, Uncle Colin Walker sat at the gates, sat at the Narrows, and this is the image of what they call Pondy. We call him Guddu, the Murray cod. That's the inside lining of a Murray cod stomach. And they say if you take, and Uncle Colin Walker said, if you hold it up against the sun, it'll show you which tree, in which part of the river it was born under. That's Yorta law. That's part of their songline, part of their dreaming, part of their knowledge. And if you look at Bruce Pascoe's book, Dark Emu, he uses the Yorta experiences as early aquaculturalists, building dams in the anabranches or the veins of our arteries and squeezing the roe out and putting them in those anabranches or those veins. So they had migration back into the mainstream system. I got to sit with Uncle Badger Bates out at Menindee. And he talks about how Corndilla and the Menindee Lake systems, how it's connected. We can do wonderful maps. This is how the Barkans, you talk about their country and use their maps. And I'm actually doing some work in Yanga at the bottom of the Murrumbidgee River with the Sustainable Diversion Limit projects and fish populations, our native fish populations, and the reconnection of these systems to allow migration and fish populations back to their traditional spawning grounds is paramount in our minds as a group. And it's Aboriginal people and scientists and community and rural stakeholders and local governments sitting at the table together. Fish migration is important. Craig, you might remember Brenton Zampatti, 2004, we tagged the fish at the lower lakes at the Coorong. It was caught at Mungandai. That's a 2,500 kilometre migration. There's a message in there. Fish passage not only enhances flow and the quality of flow, it can also assist with mitigating blue-green algal growth. But this is a project that I had the wonderful opportunity to work on out with the Brewarrina mob, the Nyemba people, and that community. It's a reverse rock ramp. And they said, we don't want steel. So all this granite, Craig, you led this, and you gave me the opportunity to work for you on this, was sourced locally at Mount Gundabooka and Byrock. And the reverse rock ramp, initially it was supposed to be over there, and the mob said no. It'll make the Nunu, Byami's Nunu that Martin was talking about, down here, null and void as a functional educational and ongoing educational infrastructure. 45,000-year-old fish trap. Now the mob are saying we got 2 fish traps because they're catching fish in here where they have a blow. This is how co-designing and adding to the cultural aesthetics of the footprint of the project can be successful. Why am I saying that? Because the economic input with the reopening and the ongoing sustainability of the Brewarrina Cultural Centre, they're running 4 tours a day, and not only is this infrastructure, but the 45,000-year-old Byami's Nunu are front and centre in what they do. The native fish strategy, we sit around, we're only limited by our imagination about the co-designing, sharing our knowledge, two-way learning, Reed et al. 2020, working with the Yolngu on the Gulf. And it's also a concept used by the First Nations people in Canada and other places where I've had the opportunity. But looking at bilingualising our education, developing projects together, looking at communication, key messages, the two-way knowledge about the cultural science and the Western science coming together and looking at how they can be meshed. These workshops, Craig, these workshops are a segue forward. And co-participation in on-ground works, on-country projects, where we have Aboriginal people and non-Aboriginal people working together to repair our country and our systems, our arteries and our veins. Because we live in a world of shrinking resource availability. But what price do we put on our ability to share our knowledge and our willingness to work together and sit, walk, talk and learn together? So, we want to engage early, and we're doing that. We've been doing that since, Craig, 2000, when we first sat in Albury to design the native fish recovery strategy, engage genuinely, meaningful engagement, but bringing people together like this forum, Aboriginal people and other stakeholders from our wider community sitting together. Engage often, the bottomless cup of tea. Keep coming back and learning. Keep coming back and sitting with, the recreational fishers as well, that know these systems backwards. So it's listen and learn. Share the work, share the outcomes. And I say, which is not goodbye, it's we'll go. Thank you.